Good day, everyone. My name is Daryl Agdon of Group 3 with our topic Impact Issues and Controversies in Biotechnology. So, first is what is biotechnology? So, biotechnology uses living organisms in biological systems to create products that improve uh, life, benefiting fields like agriculture, medicine, in the environment. So, simply put, it's the use of living organisms of biological systems to create useful products. For example, use bacteria to make cheese, used to make bread, and genetic engineering to make pest-resistant crops. However, it also raises ethical and environmental and social concerns such as GMOs, gene editing, and unequal access. So this report aims to discuss both its positive and the issues surrounding its safe, ethical, and sustainable use. So, we're going to be discussing about three main issues: environmental issues, gene flow, and the toxicity and biodiversity and allergenicity. So now, environmental issues. Here's a clear pictures. Now, GMOs can reduce pesticide use and boost yields. That's a huge help to farmers, but sometimes this can disrupt ecosystems or harm non-target species. For example, a GM plant designed to kill pests might help affect insects like bees or butterflies. So while biotechnology improves farming, it's not always risk-free. Next is we have the gene flow. Um, the gene flow is defined as the movement of genes, example alleles, with a population or between interbreeding populations, resulting from processes such as outcrossing, natural selection, or seed migration. So this means that the movement of genes from between plants, like when pollen from a GM drifts to a nearby non-GM plant. So imagine two farms side by side. One uses GM corn and the other uses grows organic corn. So if the pollen mixes, uh, the, the organic crops might carry the GM traits, so that's gene flow, and it can cause both environmental and economic problems. Next is the toxicity and allergenicity. So concerns related to genetically modified foods stem from the introduction of foreign genes, which can result in new proteins that may act as toxins or allergens. Despite safety testing prior to the release, unexpected reactions could still occur, particularly in sensitive individuals. So for most people, it's safe, but for someone sensitive, it could trigger an unexpected allergic reaction. That's why food testing is important before anything reaches the market. So first question is um, we have discussed that biotechnology has greatly contributed to human progress through innovations in agriculture, medicine, and environmental management. However, it raises several environmental and health-related concerns such as gene flow, toxicity, and allergenicity. So, in your own understanding, discuss how biotechnology can be used responsibly to balance its benefits with its potential risks to the environment and human health. So, support your answer with examples. Next is we have the environmental issues. So, with its example and solution. So, first is the development of pest and weed resistance, effects on non-target organisms, loss of biodiversity and ecosystem disruption, and development of pest and weed resistance. First is the development of pest and weed resistance. So, over reliance on GM products producing pesticides or herbicides can lead to the evolution of resistant pests and weeds. So, this resistance can make pest control more difficult and may increase chemical use, which harms the environment. So we have these here three solutions. First is rotation of crop types and pesticides to reduce selection pressure. So um, rotation of different crop types and can help so that um, the GM the GM plants won't have a resistance to pests and weeds. Next is the adoption of refuge areas where GM crops are planted to sustain susceptible pest populations. So there should be a buffer zone in that. And then breeding for multi-trait resistance and integrating biotechnology with other sustainable agricultural practices. And then effects on non-target organism. So some GM crops produces substances such as Bt toxins to resist pests. So these substances may inevitably affect the non-target organisms like beneficial insects, as I've said in example like the honeybees or soil microbes, which can compromise biodiversity and economic services. So first solution of that is a thorough environmental impact assessments before commercial release to evaluate its effects on non-target organisms. And then the use of IPM practices combining GM crops with conventional methods to reduce dependence on a single control strategies. So dapat nga po other practices no with the GM crops para nga dili lang nga isa lang nga control strategies if ever anything might happen no cross pollination contamination or resistance or to prevent that from happening. And then development of more specific GM traits targeting only pests to minimize collateral impacts. So that is sabotable. So X is the loss of biodiversity and ecosystem um, disruption. So if a farmer grows one type of GM crop, biodiversity can decline. So when natural plants varieties disappear, the animals that depend on them will also be affected. So it's like removing one piece of like in a Jenga tower. So as we all know, like a Jenga tower is organized, but if the whole system becomes unstable, it will disrupt. So to fix that, we need eco-friendly farming, like intercropping and conserving natural habitats. So first solution of that is to implement rigorous environmental impact assessments before approval and widespread release of GM crops to understand potential biodiversity effects. And next is promote biodiversity friendly farm practices such as crop rotation, intercropping, and conservation of native habitats alongside biotechnology use. And third is the use of integrated pest management practices combining GM crops with conventional SIMGAPON to reduce dependence on single control strategies. And lastly, um, to also use specific GM traits, targeting only pests to minimize collateral impacts. And then GM flow and impact on wild plants. So it is a major concern where genetically modified plants may transfer introduced genes to wild relatives of non-GM crops. So this may alter the genetic composition. So, so gene flow and impact on wild plants. So a major concern is gene flow, where genetically modified plants may transfer introduced genes to wild relatives or non-GM crops. So this may alter the genetic composition of wild plants populations and potentially disrupt ecosystems. So first, we have the isolation strategies during field testing, such as distance separation or physical removal or productive structures to prevent gene transfer. So um, we can integrate buffer zones, or um, for example, we did a transgenic crop. We can make it to a wild relative so that you can prevent gene transfer. Then regulatory guidelines and monitoring protocols to control and assess gene flow risks. And then development of biological containment methods like sterile GM to minimize gene escape. So question number two. So biotechnology has greatly improved agricultural productivity, but it also poses environmental challenges such as pest and weed resistance, harm to non-target organisms, biodiversity loss, and gene flow to wild plants. So in your own words, discuss how these issues affect the environment and explain how the suggested solutions can help ensure that biotechnology is used sustainably and responsibly. So we have here the gene flow issues and solution. So first issues we have the cross pollination with organic crops. Second is hybrid species creation. And thirdly is the legal and economic disputes. So with the cross pollination organic crops, so um, as we've learned, no pollen from GM plants can fertilize organic or traditional crops, compromising their non-GM status, especially if a particular farm only grows organic crops, and if another farm grows GM crops, so market value and consumer trust declines, and as well as so to a solution for that is to establish buffer zones of non-GM crops or empty land between GM and organic fields. So second solution would be stagger planting schedules so that GM and non-GM plants do not flower at the same time. Then third is the use of physical barriers such as windbreaks or greenhouse to reduce pollen spread. No? So makahelp gid na siya ang sa schedules kay di siya magdungan og flower dayon ang sa physical barriers pod na para ma-mitigate ang pollen spread. Then for the hybrid species creation, so gene flow can produce hybrid curing traits from both GM and wild plants, potentially disrupting ecosystems and reducing biodiversity. So first solution is to conduct regular feed monitoring to detect and remove hybrid plants early. So in a particular area, if apektuhan na siya no, ang isa ka area of GM nag-anay hybrid species dapat gid nga ma-detect dayon para dili mag-spread na dayon ang GM dira nga area if da kailangan nga pure na siya or organic lamang, and then implement isolation distances during plantation to reduce the likelihood of cross pollination, and then developing biological containment methods such as sterile GM plants or non-reproductive traits to prevent gene transfer to wild relatives to prevent um, further escalation. So, for the legal and economic disputes, so an accidental gene transfer to a farmer's field may result in a patent infringement claims or in contamination disputes. So, if a company that owns a certain GM product that has its own patent, no, if there would be a gene transfer to a nearby field, so another company could and have causing financing and legal problems of that. So they should follow regulatory guidelines for planting GM crops and document all farming practices. And with the use of isolation and buffer strategies to separate GM and non-GM fields and minimize accidental contamination, good to prevent anything serious, and then to maintain traceability systems that record the source of movement of seeds to defend against legal claims. So, if possible, good na apoy mga modern nga mga um, machineries to be used on that or gadgets. And then, third question is um, when gene flow happens when a GM plant transfers their gene to non-GM or wild plants, so which can cause problems like contamination of organic crops, co-creation of hybrids, and legal issues for farmers. So, question is, as a student, explain how these problems can affect farmers and the environment. So, and suggest practical ways to prevent or control gene flow using examples like GM canola in Canada. So next is the toxicity and allergenicity, and with its example and control. First is we have the Starling corn in United States in the year 2000, the GM soybean with Brazil nut gene, 1996, and other issues about the legal and economic disputes. So for the Starling corn, so the SRY9C protein in Starling corn was unusually resistant to heat and digestive enzymes, so meaning it could survive cooking in digestion more than other proteins. So this raised concern that the protein might trigger allergic reactions in humans, especially if consumed in processed foods, posing a potential public health risk. So now um, their solution way back then for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency or EPA. So they revoked the Starlink's approval for food use to prevent human exposure to this kind of GM product. And then they have made segregation systems were implemented to separate starling corn from other non-GM or food use crops during the planting and processing, no. So ilahan na gina siyang gi advance. And then the post-market monitoring was strengthened to quickly detect any unintended presence of CRY9C in the food supply. So that's it for the Starlink. So with the GM soy nut with Brazil nut gene is that there are individuals allergic to Brazil nuts that also react to the GM soybean protein. So it indicated a risk of food allergies. So um, the introduced genes from allergic sources created unintended health risks in humans. So even if GM crop is nutritionally beneficial, so you can see that there is a reaction between the Brazil nut with a 1:200 ratio with the transgenic soybean. So solution was the project was immediately discontinued before the crop reached commercialization before mag-worldwide na siya. So pre-market allergenicity testing became mandatory na again. So because of the GM soybean with Brazil nut gene, they have used this to further have testing before commercialization good. It became now a mandatory. So it included the use of allergen databases to screen potential allergens yun. Because if ma-publish na yun na ang kuan nga ng GM product is it is very dangerous for other because it can cause death to an extent. So third solution was serum screening from individuals with known allergies was required to detect potential cross-reactivity before approval of any GM crop. So katuda yung mga na-affected na ng GM soybean is nga kuan sila dayon og ang ilahang I think kung sa live sa ato para makakuha na dayon ma-detect ang potential cross-reactivity. And then there is we also have the BT eggplant, which is created in brinjal in India. So they were concerned that the CR1 AC protein could harm non-target species such as beneficial insects that consumption might have unknown health effects on humans. So kung siya nga BT eggplant na siya insect resistant na siya. However, na siya unknown health effects on humans. So public opposition calls for the precaution delayed the crop's approval. So it highlighted the need for thorough risk assessment and transparent communication gapon. So with that, multi-location biosafety, biosafety field trials were conducted to evaluate ecological and human health risks before commercial release. And then food safety testing by the Indian Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee or the GIAC ensured the protein was safe for human consumption. Now, a strict labeling, monitoring, and biosafety guidelines were established to control exposure, track cultivation, and maintain public confidence with this kind of GM product. So, fourth question is that um, the genetically modified crops such as starting corn, GM soybeans with Brazil nut genes, and BT eggplant, so they have raised concerns about toxicity and allergenicity and potential affecting human health and the environment. So, as a student, discuss the issues associated with these GM crops and explain the measures that can be implemented to control or prevent this risk. So, highlighting the importance of safety testing, monitoring, and regulatory oversight. And then, lastly, is how the issues and controversies of biotechnology affected farmers, students, and consumers. First is the effect on farmers. So there's has been an economic pressure that time, you know. So after that, then after the introduction of the GM products, so farmers then must purchase patented seeds every season instead of saving seeds from their harvest. So this can strain small scale farmers especially. So example of that is a corn farmer relying on biotech companies. So pagkuman na ana kay katong nakuha na dayon ang mga GM products nga nanagid siya mga risks. So muna ito nga ang mga patented seeds kay may need loans to afford the next planting season. Example, if mga dagko na gid kayo nga mga farmers food and not no instant kada ko good. However, naglit sila ana nga time kinid siya nga magilis-ilis sa ilahang sa ilahang mga seeds. And then ang ilang crop management challenges. So the GM crops resistant to herbicides has cross-planted with nearby GM crops, so it created super weeds. Now farmers spend time and more money controlling these weeds. So who was a rice farmer growing rice, yeah, have faced contamination of rice traditional varieties. It affected local seed supply and market value. So lastly is the market limitations. So some consumers and coaches rejects GM products which reduce market opportunities. So a farmer growing GM soybeans for export may not find buyers in the region where GM support foods are banned, resulting in unsold crops even today. And then to the students, no, ethical decision making in education, wherein a student may encounter situations where they must decide whether to conduct experiments involving GMOs or CRISPR in school labs. So it balanced learning goals with safety, ethics. So you could be a student participating in genetic modification project must ensure proper containment and follow ethical guidelines. So it could really put a strain on a student if they decide to test on a GM because it really involves financial and to follow ethical guidelines. And then exposed to misinformation. So social media and public debates about GMOs or gene editing can confuse students, so making it harder for them to distinguish between scientifically proven facts and myths. Example of this would be example if a high school student searching GM crops may find conflicting claims about health risks affecting their project or opinion because there is little to studying back then for GM products with today with still having conflicting claims about health risks. For some it may be good, for some it may not, because there are countries that still reject GM products or with in terms of the culture. And then hands-on laboratory safety. So practical lab work involves handling microbes or genetic materials, which requires awareness of safety protocols to avoid accidents. So if we use a bacteria for bioremediation experiment, it really requires the proper equipment such as gloves, and for its also for its disposal because it pose an environmental risk, and a supervision to prevent contamination is also advisable. So uh, an advisor with a high skills is required. And then for the consumers, so food choices and health concerns. So consumers face practical decisions about whether to buy GM foods due to concerns about allergenicity or long-term effects. So a family may avoid GM corn despite its national benefits, choosing more expensive organic alternatives. So there might be families nga they do not know themselves what they are allergic for because some GM products can cause unexpected allergens. That's why that some families hesitate for GM products. And for the access and affordability, advanced biotech products may be less affordable or available in some regions. As I said, that there are countries that still reject GM product up till date. So this affects nutrition and health outcomes because up to present there are now already much better products or crops that are in GM. And also, vaccines developed through biotechnology may reach urban hospitals first, leaving rural communities with delayed access for this. And then lastly is the ethical and lifestyle decisions. So biotechnology controversies influence daily decisions such as whether to buy to support cloning or gene edited foods. So a consumer may choose not to buy a lab grown meat for ethical reasons, affecting demand in the market. So even though that lab grown meat is much better, but for some ethical reasons it affects the lifestyle decisions of the people. And last question is, as a student, can you provide at least one example of how the issues and controversies affects your life as a student studying in animal science, and how did you handle these challenges? So for the summary, biotechnology enhances quality of life through innovations in agriculture, medicine, industry, and environmental management. So while it offers benefits like higher crop yields and reduced pesticide use, it also raises ethical, social, and safety concerns, including issues with gene editing, cloning, unequal access, and intellectual property rights. So a major area of controversy is genetically modified organisms which can harm ecosystems, reduce biodiversity, accelerate pest and weed resistance, and cause gene flow to non-GM crops. So food safety risk and such as allergen or toxin production further emphasize the need for strict safety testing and monitoring. So sustainable practices like crop rotation, intercropping, refuge areas, and conservation of native habitats are essential to minimize environmental risk and ensure responsible use of biotechnology. And that is all. Thank you.